Goblin launch detected.
Hey gang! Using the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, will get you 10% off any order over $10 at Flipside Gaming. It'll also get you 10% off any orders of singles at Multizone. And it'll get you 10% off most products at Original Magic Art, with the exceptions of some paintings. If these fine sites don't have what you're looking for, you can also consider using my affiliate link when ordering from TCG Player. And if you'd like to join the generic Goblin Gang to support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description below. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game is another one I filmed with some friends in Ottawa, but it's a bit of an old one since my Greven deck is still around. I keep a Virtus the Veiled, Molten Slag Heap, Hex Parasite, Phyrexian Arena, Swamp, and 2 mountains. Mark is playing his Kenrith deck, keeping Throne of the High City, Simic Guildgate, Mountain, Plains, Cabal, Rampant Growth, and Captive Audience. Chris is playing Sen Triplets, keeping 3 islands, Threads of Disloyalty, Snow-Covered Plains, Colossus of Akrois, and Urza's Ruinous Blast. Last but certainly not least is Derek playing Trostani Discordant, keeping a Tranquil Thicket, Mistvale Plains, a Normal Plains, Huatli Radiant Champion, Second Harvest, Harvest Season, and Anointed Procession. Chris wins the die roll and starts us off. Chris plays a Snow-Covered Plains. Mark plays a tap Simic Guildgate. Derek plays a tap Mistvale Plains. I play a mountain. Chris plays an island. Mark plays a Throne of the High City and casts Rampant Growth to go and find a basic. Derek plays a forest. I play a Molten Slag Heap and cast Generator Servant. Chris plays an island while Mark reveals the swamp he found and puts it to field. Mark plays a mountain. Derek plays a plains. I play a swamp and sacrifice the servant to make 2 colorless, tapping my swamp as well to cast a hasty Virtus. I go at Derek, dealing 1 with Virtus, and then have Derek lose half of his life, dropping to 19. I then play a Hex Parasite and pass. Chris plays an island and casts Soul Ring. He then plays Wrath Capuchin and passes turn. Mark plays a plains and casts Cabal. Derek draws and plays a tap Tranquil Thicket. I draw for turn and play a tap Lava Claw Reaches. Moving to combat, Virtus heads at Mark this time, who doesn't want to lose half of his life total, so he blocks with Cabal and passes. Chris plays a swamp and is now able to cast a Sen Triplets, which he does so. He then swings Wrath at Mark and passes turn. Mark plays another swamp and casts Eternal Skylord. The zombie wizard enters, amassing 2, and makes a zombie army token to put the counters onto. At the end of Mark's turn, Derek gets some revenge by using Crozen Grip on my poor little Hex Parasite. Derek plays out an Anointed Procession and passes. I play a mountain and cast Phyrexian Delver, bringing back the Generator Servant and losing 2 life. Chris picks Mark on his upkeep with the Sen Triplets trigger, and Mark reveals his hand. Chris plays a land, and instead casts something from his own hand, a Colossus of Akrois, and passes turn. Mark plays a plains, and brings out Kenrith in his main phase. He lets the table know that he's not above making a deal, and goes to combat. He hits me for 2 in the air with his flying zombie army, which frankly sounds more terrifying than it actually was. Derek untaps for turn, and taps 4 mana for a March of the Multitudes where X is 1. This has him gaining 2 tokens because of the procession, and he passes turn. I sacrifice my servant to make 2 colorless and pay the rest for Greven. I play a Blood Crypt as my land for turn, losing 2 life to have it come in untapped. This pumps Greven by +2/+0, and despite it being an instant, I cast a main phase Reckless Spite. I target the Eternal Skylord and Kenrith, and lose another 5 life as the spell resolves, pumping Greven even further. Since everyone but Mark has enough blockers to deal with the menace, I have no choice but to swing my commander at him, and as I attack, I sacrifice the Phyrexian Delver, drawing 3 cards and losing 2 more life as I do, pumping Greven even more. Mark then takes 14 commander damage from Greven, and I pass to Chris. Chris chooses Derek this time, and there are some tasty targets in his hand. Chris then draws for turn and plays a tap Celestial Colonnade. Chris then plays Derek's copy of Captain of the Watch, gaining 2 soldier tokens as it enters. Moving to combat, he swings Raph and the Sen Triplets at me for 6. Mark untaps and draws. He taps out to recast Kenrith in his main phase and passes to Derek. Derek draws and goes to combat. He swings his 2 soldiers at me, dealing 2 and gaining 2. In his second main phase, he casts Harvest Season to go and find 2 basics, passing turn. I play a Coombe Refuge, which comes in tapped, and I gain 1 life. I tap enough to cast probably one of my favorite spells in EDH, Sunbird's Invocation. I can't really afford to attack at this point, so I have to pass to Chris. Chris has the Sen Triplets trigger target Mark. He draws for turn, and then casts from Mark's hand Illusion of Choice, drawing a card. He also gets to choose how everyone votes, not that it really matters at this point. Chris then plays a tapped Azorius Chancery, bouncing a land back to hand. Heading to combat, 3 soldiers head at me. I block 1 and take 4 from the 2 unblocked. Mark draws and casts Tyrant's Choice. We have to vote for either death or torture, with Mark and Chris picking death, while Derek and I pick torture. With this being a tie, torture wins, and we each lose 4 life, and Mark then passes. Derek draws and plays a forest. He taps 5 mana for Trostani, who comes in and makes 4 soldier tokens as she enters because of the Anointed Procession. He swings one of the now 2/2 soldiers at Mark, and 1 at me. Mark takes the hit for 2 while I block, and Derek gains 4 life. Derek then passes turn, and Trostani triggers, which has him regain control of his Captain of the Watch. I draw and play a Swamp. I cast Psychosis Crawler from hand, getting a Sunbird's trigger and revealing my top 5. I take the Disciple of Bolus, who enters, and I sacrifice Greven, gaining 5 life and drawing 5 cards. Sadly at this point, the Crawler is still on the stack, and only resolves after I finish my draw. I then cast a Nile Spellbomb, getting another Sunbird trigger, but I don't hit anything, and I bottom the card. Chris untaps and has his triplets target me. I reveal a pretty land-heavy hand, and Chris draws for turn. He plays the Snow-Covered Plains, and Chris is tempted to make his Colossus monstrous, but fears retribution from Mark. Mark promises, as a benevolent sovereign, that he will do nothing untowards the Colossus if the Colossus doesn't swing at him. Chris then casts my Gilded Lotus from my hand, and plays his own Solemn Simulacrum. He swings Raph at Derek, and then goes to find a basic from the Solemn trigger. At the end of turn, Mark has enough to activate Kenrith to bring back the Eternal Skylord from his graveyard, who amasses another 2 counters onto his zombie army. Mark plays out a Thorn of the Black Rose, becoming the Monarch as it enters. He goes to combat, hitting Chris with his flying zombie army for 4. Mark then passes, drawing at the end of turn from the Monarch trigger. Derek swings his now 5 3/3 soldier tokens at Chris, who blocks 4 of them. He gains 15 life, losing one of the soldiers who is blocked by the Colossus, while Chris loses his token and draws a card as the Solemn dies, and takes 3. I draw, and my opponents take 1 from the Psychosis Crawler. I play a Swamp, and pay 4 for Strands of Night, gaining a Sunbird trigger. I take the Whisper Silk Cloak from the pile of 4, and I then move it onto the Psychosis Crawler once it resolves. I then move to combat, swinging the Crawler at Chris for 5. In my post-combat main phase, I pay 3 black mana for a Necropotence. I whiff on the Sunbird's trigger, and then lose 3 life to exile 3 cards to Necropotence. I then move to my end step, putting them to hand. Chris puts the Sen Triplets trigger on the stack, targeting Derek, and Derek responds by casting Secure the Wastes, where X is 3. He gains 6 soldier tokens, and then phases out when he casts Teferi's Protection. Chris then plays a Spire of Industry, and taps 10 mana to make the Colossus a monstrous 20/20. He goes to combat, and swings it at me. I block with the Disciple, not that it'll do much to stop me from dying, and I get taken out either way. I do at least get to take back my Gilded Lotus. At the end of turn, Mark activates Kenrith to gain 5 life. Mark draws and passes, drawing at the end of turn from being the Monarch. Derek plays out Legion's Landing, and makes his 2 vampire tokens as it enters. He casts Huatli Radiant Champion, and upticks her gaining 15 loyalty counters. He then taps some mana and some creatures to convoke out an Hour of Reckoning. Chris responds once he gains priority, casting Urza's Ruinous Blast at an instant speed because Wrath being out. With the 2 wipes on the stack, Mark activates Kenrith to draw a card. He then activates Kenrith again to gain 5 more life. The non-legendary permanents then get exiled, and then the non-token creatures get destroyed, and with nothing else, Derek passes. Chris untaps and draws. He casts Dimir Signet and then a Nightveil Spectre. He animates the Colonnade and swings the flying Vigilant 4/4 at Mark to steal away the Monarch emblem. Chris then passes, drawing at the end of turn. Mark casts Reap and Sow in his main phase, not entwined, and goes to find a land card to put into play. It'll be a land that can tap for white, and Mark shortcuts first by casting Cavalier of Dawn before finding the land. He has it enter, destroying the Planeswalker to keep Derek from gaining the draw emblem, and makes Derek a 3/3 golem instead. Derek draws for turn, and recasts Trostani, gaining 2 more tokens as she enters. He goes to combat, hitting Chris for 4 with the golem, and stealing the Monarch emblem. He passes, drawing at the end of turn. Chris plays a snow-covered island for turn, and goes at Derek with the Nightveil Spectre. Derek takes 2, and exiles his top card. He also loses the Monarch as Chris did combat damage. Chris then pays 11 mana for a Darksteel Colossus, and passes, drawing at the end of turn. Mark untaps, and asks Chris to let him take back the Monarch emblem. Chris agrees if Mark will leave his Darksteel Colossus alone, and Mark hits Chris for 4 with the Cavalier, taking back the emblem. In his second main phase, Mark then casts Approach the Second Sun, gaining him 7 life, and then putting itself 7th from the top of his library. He then casts a Dreadhorde Invasion, and passes, drawing at the end of turn. Derek casts Doubling Season, and then a Skull Clamp in his main phase. He goes to combat, swinging everything at Mark. This transforms Legion's Landing into a Danto the First Fort, and Mark blocks the 4/4 golem with his Cavalier, but still takes the 4 from the soldier tokens, while Derek gains 4 life. Derek then clamps Trostani, and passes turn. Chris casts Brainstorm in his main phase, drawing 3 and putting 2 back. He casts Knowledge Exploitation, and targets Mark with a spell to go and steal an instant or a sorcery. He decides on Commence the Endgame, drawing 2 cards and then amassing X, where X is the number of cards he has in hand, which has Chris make a zombie army token, and putting 7 +1/+1 counters to it. He then drops an Aethersworn Agitator, and goes to combat. The Colossus heads at Derek, while the Nightveil goes at Mark. Derek blocks with Trostani, putting her to the graveyard so he'll draw 2 cards from the Skull Clamp, while Mark takes the hit as well, exiling his top card. This means that Derek takes 8 from the trample damage, while Mark takes only 2. Chris then becomes the Monarch, and draws at the end of turn. Mark loses 1 in his upkeep, and amasses 1. He then casts Widespread Brutality, amassing 2 this time onto his zombie army, and then deals 3 damage to all creatures. Mark then passes. Derek casts a Martial Coup, and puts 5 into the X. This will make him 5 soldier tokens, which is then doubled by Doubling Season to 10, but more importantly, destroy all other creatures. With the Cavalier dying, Mark does get a trigger, but sadly is no target for it to resolve with. Derek then casts a Luminarch Ascension, and passes. Chris plays Mark's Stolen Golgari Guildgate from the Nightveil Spectre hit, and pays 3 for a Darksteel Ingot. He moves to attack, and goes at Derek with the Colossus again. Derek blocks with all 10 of his tokens, taking only 1. Mark loses 1, and amasses 1 in his upkeep, and he then taps out completely, casting Play of the Game to exile non-land permanents. Derek plays a Tendershoot Dryad in his main phase, and he has City's Blessing at this point. He then pays 3 for Growing Rights of Itlimoc, and reveals Brimaz from the cards they looks at on top. Chris plays a Stolen Canopy Vista as his land for turn, and then Sun Titan. The Sun Titan enters, and brings back his Nightveil Spectre, and Chris then animates the Celestial Colonnade. He swings it at Mark for 4 in the air. This has him becoming the Monarch, and Chris passes, drawing at the end of turn. Derek gets a Saproling token on Mark's turn, and Mark draws. He then plays a Captive Audience in his main phase, which enters under the control of Derek. He then plays out Dauntless Bodyguard, and passes. Derek has to resolve the audience trigger first, and he responds to it, destroying the enchantment with a beast within. With the trigger still in the stack, he uses Second Harvest to double his tokens. He then resolves the audience trigger by picking the mode that has him discard his hand. He then gets his Saproling token on his upkeep, and draws for turn. We see a tapped Temple of Plenty come in, letting Derek scry 1, and he keeps it on top. He then swings the 2 Saprolings he can at Chris, who blocks 1 with the Sun Titan and takes 3. Derek then passes, and at the end of turn, transforms the Growing Rites into Itlimoc, Cradle of the Sun. He also gets to draw from the Monarch trigger. Derek gains a Saproling token, and Chris draws and plays a tapped Arcane Sanctum. He swings both of his creatures at Mark, who blocks the Sun Titan with the Bodyguard. Mark takes 2 in the air from the Nightveil Spectre, and exiles his top card. It's another land. He plays out Kaigen his second main phase, before playing out Sen Triplets and passing. Derek gains a Saproling token, and Mark plays his first island of the game, before recasting Kenrith and passing. Derek gains his token, and taps 7 for Elesh Norn. He swings 6 Saprolings and 2 beasts at Chris, which even with blocks is enough to take him out. Derek gains a token on Mark's upkeep, and Mark draws. He plays Maze's End, which is an alternate win con for the deck, but won't really work so well with the exiled Guildgate Chris had stolen. He then plays Recross the Paths, revealing off the top until he hits a land card. He hits a forest and puts the rest on the bottom. And then he and Derek clash. Derek wins by revealing a 5 converted mana cost card off the top of his library, which means the spell doesn't go back to Mark's hand, and Mark then passes. Derek gains his token and draws for turn. He plays Keeper of Fables and swings all but 1 Saproling at Mark. Before moving to blocks, Mark reanimates the Cavalier with Kenrith and blows up Elesh Norn. He then blocks 2 of them, but still knows when he's beat, and extends the hand. Game review time. So I think this is a pretty fun game. Unfortunately though, it does highlight why I don't play my Greven deck anymore. I seem to hurt myself more than my opponents did this game, and it's not really a playstyle I enjoy too much. Mark's deck was probably more on theme than a lot of the other Kenrith decks that I've seen, and a lot of the cards that he picked were heavily influenced around the idea of being a king and having an army and having advisors and so forth. I loved the theme, and he actually was able to hang in there until the very end. Derek was playing the other Trostani, one that I've never really used, and it was great to see that her secondary effect, the Homeward Path-like ability, was actually used in this game. He did build her in a very similar fashion to what I'd imagine a lot of people do with the first Trostani, and I guess it was pretty sweet to have a bunch of 1/1 tokens when your commander was actually an Anthem effect. Considering that Chris had Sen Triplets out for such a long time, and he went mostly unopposed with it, he really didn't abuse casting spells from other people's hands too much, which I know some people have a problem with. I honestly wonder if it was some kind of Golem/Colossus tribal, because he seemed to have a lot of Darksteel or Colossus or Golem-based cards. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/MTGMudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/MTGMudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.